Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about self-deception. Are you lying to yourself? Are you telling yourself the truth? And Dustin, you and I had a really interesting conversation offline about how this has really popped up in the boardroom, in business, and in life several times just in the recent history. And I want you to tell the listeners a little bit more about what you told me, because I just found it fascinating, and it got me thinking about many recent scenarios as well that I've found myself in that are very similar.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about is in the last, it's always been there, but I just feel like in the last 60 to 90 days, I've just seen it through a different lens. Where how many people, whether it be leaders at our company, whether it be other business leaders, and even others challenging me, how many times, whether it be in business or just in life, how often you see people lying to themselves, right? And they just have such a, it could be deception, it could be delusion, it could be lack of perspective, it could be, it could be all these different things. But it's been amazing to me and how many times, even in the last few months, how many times I've had a conversation where someone is basically telling me the story that they're telling themselves, right? This is the problem that I'm running into, and this is why this isn't working or that isn't working. And how many times as an outsider, I can just simply say, well, you're full of it. Like, that's not reality. Like, do you realize that's not reality? And how often people kind of take a step back and say, well, how did I not see that? Because they see it instantly, right? Like the minute you call it, it's not like they're fighting it being a reality. It's just like, wow, how did I not see that coming? And the same for me. I just recently, this was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking to someone, and same thing, right? Just kind of sharing, okay, this is what we're trying to do, and this is what we're trying to accomplish. And he was able to just call me out. And so to me, what I was excited to kind of talk about is, how often that happens. And it's not all bad, by the way, right? Like sometimes the reason we often lie to ourselves, it's, really survival mode, right? Like the psychology behind it is your brain is trained to keep you surviving. And so we have all these different, defense mechanisms and things like that our brain plays tricks on us essentially to kind of soften reality so that we can continue on with life. And, to me, what's been interesting is, in many ways, that deception, that lying to yourself, in certain pockets can actually be helpful.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can actually use it as fuel, but yet how often it actually does the opposite because you just lack that perspective. And like as a quick example, like I think about and we've talked about this in the past. People believe that they're working so hard to get something done, right? Like this is the thing we talked about where. If you really want to accomplish something incredible in your career, at some period of time, you have to put in ridiculous hours, like you just do, no matter how efficient you are and all that. And this, mindset of 60 plus hours a week. Like if you really want to achieve greatness, at some point you have to wear that badge. And that, 34% of the country says they work 60 plus hours a week, but only 3.8% actually do, And so how do we have such that line? And one of the kind of quotes that always comes to mind is Albert Einstein, which I don't quote him a lot, but he has this saying, and I'm sure I'm misquoting it, but something to the effect of, you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. And
that's good.
So you have to get out of your rut. That's why you don't see the problem. It's why you can't seem to address it. And so to me, the only way you get out of that is you got to have some sort of process for yourself to get out of that rut, or you need to seek outside so that someone can basically shake your cage and say, you got to get out of your own way.
Yeah, I can't help but think about self awareness when you talk about this subject, specifically where you're headed with that. And so often we think of ourselves as being maybe engaged in meetings. We think of ourselves as maybe being a good listener or any number of things like that. But until someone calls you out on it, you don't know. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't have great self awareness, or there might be people who have self awareness, but maybe don't see it because we can't see ourselves. We typically can't hear ourselves. Just like you and I have this podcast, I like to think, wow, I'm a great podcaster. I'm a great interviewer. Until you listen to yourself, you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I need a little work on that. And obviously, we've gotten better since we've started doing it. But a lot of times we need that person or people in our life to give us the honest feedback, which I'll tell you what, I actually crave feedback. I think that feedback is a gift, good, right, or indifferent. And that's what helps us improve. But if you're not getting feedback, how do you improve? I think you're really just ultimately status quo, right?
Absolutely. And how you get that feedback. So sometimes it's feedback and sometimes it's just perspective, right?
Sure.
Sometimes the person doesn't even really have the answer. They can't tell you what to do, but they bring up something that if you're willing to see it, suddenly creates
Bingo.
clarity, right? And sometimes people just are unwilling to see it, right? They have their blinders on and they don't have that genuine curiosity. But I agree with you. It certainly starts with a lot of self awareness. The challenge I always find is self awareness to me is kind of like telling your spouse like that you're in a fight to like calm down, right? I mean, it's like, well, duh, yeah, be more self aware. Well, I don't think most people wake up in the morning trying to not be self aware, but they
Right.
don't necessarily have a way of doing it. And certainly there's an element of self awareness of just thinking about yourself and challenging your own thinking and things like that. But my experience has been a lot of times when you talk to people about are they self-aware, they've really become self-aware from an outside party. Like they believe it now, they're aware of it, they acknowledge where their strengths and weaknesses may are, or the impact that they're having on something positively or negatively. But so often they may call it self-awareness, but they became self-aware because someone else told them.
Sure. It's interesting to me when you say that. I think you have to want to improve. And if you don't want to improve, typically you're not going to put in that work, meaning that might be asking questions, asking for feedback, because you know what? Unfortunately, there are leaders that will sugarcoat things or they just won't give you that tough feedback. And so if you want to improve and you're seeking that information, you're also reading. Maybe you're reading articles, blogs, listening to podcasts in effort to pick up things that you can do to improve upon this. Maybe it's self-awareness. And so I think the people that want to improve, whether they see areas of improvement or not, they're the ones who naturally generate more self-awareness, because if maybe you don't see any areas of opportunity, why would you want to improve, right?
Yep, for sure.
Typically means, I think, comes with the territory of having low self-awareness. So I'm always one who, and let me tell you this, I don't believe that their perfect exists. And so I'm always trying to improve. Always. I seek that feedback, always trying to get better at my craft. And I think if you have that mentality, you just working harder to continually get better. And I don't want to get perfect because I don't think it exists, but I think if you're hungry to improve, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think even the mindset of improvement I've seen with some people is a way that they lie to themselves. There's so many people that will say, "I want to get better," right, and I want to improve, and I want to continue to strive. But then when you really see their behavior, they're just lying to them. They don't really want to. Like they want the result. They just don't. They don't. It's the Marine saying, right? Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? So, and in some cases, it's they're unwilling to sacrifice. In other times, I feel like they don't even know really what it takes. They think they do, and they think they're doing it, but they haven't really seeked out what is the actual behavior that I need to do in order to achieve that. And that, I think it goes back to, and we've talked about this in the past, who you surround yourself, the 5 people that you surround yourself with the most, if they can't tell you the truth, this self-deception will run rampant.
Oh yeah.
And I was just talking to my son about this the other day. We were talking about different things, and he's in high school now. And I was, talking to him about, I said, the interesting thing about this, kind of 5-person rule, right? You are basically a collection of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with at any given time. And in life, those 5 people, if you're a driver, you're a striver, you're really trying to achieve, those 5 people change. They have to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because, if you're continuing to advance and improve, you might pass people. And
You will.
To continue to look at, who are those people that I'm surrounding myself with, and, can they tell me the truth? And are they challenging me? Because if, you mentioned it right before we got on, right? Like, the enemy of greatness is the comfort zone, right? So if you're just comfortable with those 5, I went through this exercise. This was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I actually seeked out a few individuals that they live other part of the country, but they're 2 very smart individuals that are in the insurance industry with me, that are just very smart, very intelligent, and I respect the heck out of them. Well, I knew of them, but I didn't know them. And so I took an active role to not just know of them, but get to know them and try to get them basically in my circle of 5, because I knew that they would challenge me in a way that I otherwise hadn't been challenged. And it's been exactly that. And it's not like we're, buddies and we hang out every month and things like that. Right. But they're part of that kind of circle of advisors, so to speak, to me, that now have forced me to get out of my own head, because, they did the same thing, right? They called out the stories that I was telling myself about, what was possible and what I was capable of, and what could or couldn't be, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that a lot of people can and should do, is to seek out those who are ahead of you, those that are more successful. And it doesn't mean trying to make friends with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, but people in your industry that you consider your peers even. But let's transition to something that I found very interesting. We were talking about this subject before we got on, and there's a really interesting article on psychologytoday.com. And it's all about exactly what we're talking about. And they have some really interesting ways to spot self-deception. In fact, they have 6 signs to help you spot, and we're going to go through each one of them. Number 1 is the weather cancels your plans. And a good example of this is when you stand for something that's truly important, you're not going to let a couple raindrops get in your way. You're going to go out there and you're going to do the thing you planned on doing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's tremendous, because, this is I think it starts with the reality of what's actually important to you. Do you have a goal because you think you're supposed to have that goal, or do you actually care about it? Because that's what's going to get you to ignore the rain. And I see so many people, I've shared this with you in the past, Chris. I wouldn't consider myself the model of health, but I'm certainly not a train wreck either, right? But there was many years of my life where that's that priority of not just being healthy, but being like healthy to the point of athletic, right? So that priority has come and gone in my life. And there's lots of people that would say, well, that should never leave. And maybe you're right? I probably shouldn't have fallen off the wagon as many times as I have there.
Nobody's perfect.
But the point is, it just wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
Right. And so, time and time again, I could continue to said, well, but that's a priority. That's a priority. Well, no, it's not. And the reason it's not is because, to your point, the weather was stopping it, right? I had this at work, or I had this at home, or I had this, or I had this. And so it just wasn't a priority. And one of the things actually that I think is most liberating is the minute you acknowledge that it's not actually your priority, it's someone else's priority for you, you can get really clear as to what are those priorities that you will fight through the rain.
Yeah.
And you're going to increase your chances tenfold if you narrow your focus to, okay, what's actually important to me?
I love that. That reminds me of a time when I ran a half marathon. It was my first one. And we live in Wisconsin where it's cold. And for someone who's not historically a runner, you can't just sign up for a half marathon and train for 2 or 3 months and run it. So I remember vividly running several times a week in days where there's snow and ice on the ground. And I said to myself, if I don't do this, I will not be able to complete this half marathon. And I didn't let the weather get in my way. And as someone who occasionally works from home, I see people run all the time in the winter months. They're not going to let a little weather issues get in their way. And I love that. Number 2, you have no plan. And I'll tell you, Dustin, someone comes from the marketing industry, I find it really interesting. I love to call people out when I'm speaking on stage. And I've said this before if you listen to the podcast, but I have this marketing summit that I do every year, and 200 plus people in the room. I ask them, show of hands, how many people here has a strategy, a documented, written strategy? And less than 10 people in the room raised their hand. And I said, that is the reason you are not seeing results from your marketing. Now, we could go deep into that subject, but I really feel like without a strategy, you're going to fall culprit. You're going to be a culprit of this for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we know it, right? So just having a plan makes you 3 to 5 times more likely to achieve something, right? Just having it. And then writing it down gives you another 10x. And, to your point, how many people say they have a plan? And so why is it so dramatic? Well, because 1, so many people just don't have a plan. And then 2, the reason writing it down has such a dramatic effect is because it's hard to write it down, especially if you're laying out the steps of that plan. Because you actually have to think about it now, right? It's, you know what, I want to, weight loss is always the easy one to communicate, right? Like, okay, I want to lose 20 pounds. How? Like how? And how many people, in January 1st will say, hey, this is what my fitness goals is. But so 1, they maybe have a goal, but they never write it down and they don't have a plan underneath it. And so it never happens, right? That's why, for those that go to the gym all the time, right? Like mid-January is really their better time because those first 2 weeks of January, all the 2-weekers hop into the gym and then all of a sudden they're gone 2-3 weeks later. And so, yeah, I think, and I also think one of the forgotten pieces is then having that written plan and having it in a spot that reminds you on a consistent basis. Because going to the point of lying to ourselves, I used to do this all the time. This was early in my sales career. I would give myself a sales goal at the beginning of the year, right? Like this was the number, irrespective of what my boss wanted, right? Like this is what I wanted to accomplish. And then inherently, 3 or 4 months into the year, I'd maybe be ahead of goal. I would change the goal in my head, right? And I would, or you were behind and you made some excuse and you changed the goal. And either way, it's not a good thing, right? Like, because you got to, set the goal, have a plan, achieve the goal. And if you blow it out, great. Then celebrate that and move on to the next goal. But I think, I think having that documented plan so that you can remind yourself consistently is so critical.
I mean, that's an episode in and of itself. The next one's pretty interesting because I hear you say this a lot, and it's you don't know yourself. But specifically, Dustin, do you know what kind of stories your mind is telling you who you are? And you say this very often is, what is the story you're telling yourself? And I love that for so many reasons because it gets you thinking, what am I thinking about? Do I believe in this narrative?
Yeah, the story to tell yourself to me has allowed myself to think through, and I don't even remember where I got it from, but I got it from someone else. And it was interesting to me because the difference between like, how are you feeling or how are you doing, as opposed to the story you're telling yourself. To me, by having it through a lens of the story you're telling yourself, we all have that narrative, that storytelling that's going on in our head on why we can't XYZ, why this can't XYZ. And what's interesting is so often that story has to do with someone else other than ourselves, right? It's, well, I need to do this for this person, or I don't have time for this, or, I'm not capable, or, I'm too old, or I'm not fast enough, or I don't live in the right part of the country, or like there's all of these excuses. And to me, the exercise of just literally writing down, just thinking through, okay, what is the story I'm telling myself on why I'm not where I want to be? And as weird as it sounds, writing that down, it's amazing when you read it back to yourself, because what am I thinking? I can change all of these things, but yet I'm, it's natural, right? Your brain almost trains you to try to play the victim card of your own life, when it's like you have complete control over almost everything in that story that you're telling yourself, if not everything.
I believe that 100%, that you are 100% in control of the way you choose to think, walk, talk, and act. And that makes a big impact. I think that changes your body language, which changes your confidence, which changes your output. But that's, again, another podcast episode for another day.
Well, and we even talked about, Chris, the CTFAR model. I know we talked about that in a different podcast, right? Like, to me, that feeds into the story that you're telling yourself.
100%. Absolutely. Number 4 here, you have a weak choice muscle. To me, this is partially about being undecisive, but the narrative with this article is really about delayed gratification. And those who have the ability to delay gratification are more successful.
It's interesting. So to me, what do you think of decision making? Why do people not make a decision? There are some times where they just don't know what to do, right? They don't even know how to judge. Okay, do I go left or do I go right? And again, I think that's where an outside party can help you, right? But that kind of weak decision muscle, I think, is a great way of putting it, because how many times have you seen someone either that was capable of having success that never got off the start line because they just couldn't decide? And so it was that paralysis by analysis.
Yep.
And, to me, I think there's been very few situations where I've seen where someone has been in a worse position by just taking action as opposed to spending more time analyzing. And that, obviously there's a balance there, right? I mean, you need to be thoughtful about what you do and where you spend your time, and we talk about that. But I find that so many people, they get so paralyzed by the decision, when in reality, if you just create action, here's the interesting thing. There's not a lot of decisions you make in life where if you go right, if it's wrong, you can get back to left. There's not many true forks in the road. If you think about, anytime someone walks into a theme park, right? People go right or they go left, and you're always looking at like, all right, well, which way do I go to get, to the shorter lines? And it's like, well, just pick a way. And if it's too long of a line, you go to the next place, right? And I think the same is true in kind of all decisions in life.
What's interesting about that for me is I truly believe that when you stop taking action, when you come to a standstill, that is when the mind starts to wander. And that is when fear sets in. And when you start to overthink or fear, because one comes with the other in that territory, you freeze and you continue not taking action. And so I think whether it be in sports, whether it be in business or leadership, we have to stay in constant motion, because the more we just freeze and take time to worry about stuff, we're going to stop taking action. And like you said, that is the enemy of productivity, in my opinion.
For sure.
Okay, moving on to number 5. You don't see your options. And this one's interesting because it says one of the struggles we have with choices is not seeing them. We automatically move away from discomfort, usually in ways that are not helpful or healthy in the long run. And we talked about this before, is the magic happens when you step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah. And so what I see is, there's two things I've seen with how do you get that? Because it's really perspective. Right?
For
If
sure.
you don't see the options, it's you lack that perspective. And some of this is surrounding yourself by different people. Some of it is really having that genuine curiosity as you're scanning the day, because there's always something you can learn from someone. But then, I also think I've talked about this, right? The weekly exercise of kind of doing a weekly review of basically what's working, what's not in your life. And what have you been successful in? What are you grateful for? What's broken? What do you need to fix? Because those two things, even that, sometimes you have that perspective, but you just haven't tapped into it because you haven't written it down. So, like as an example, in the weekly review that I do, right? If all of a sudden 3-4 weeks in a row, you've written down the same reason why you haven't been able to get something done or something isn't optimized, it's really easy to be like, okay, I've written this down 3 weeks in a row. What is going on, right? Or I wrote that down every week for the entire last quarter and still nothing has changed. Okay, well, guess what? I need a fresh perspective. Clearly, either this isn't a priority, I don't know how to do it, I got to give something else up, whatever that is. But I keep writing it down, but I'm not taking action. How do I turn that into action?
That's interesting too, because I think, for us being leaders, right? So one thing that comes up a lot for me is people say, hey, you want to go play golf tomorrow? And it's like, well, okay, that's a short notice. I can't do that. But since our summers are short here in Wisconsin, you want to take advantage of that. And so you're never going to find time. I'm not going to find time, but you have to make time, and you will make time if it's a priority. And so I think you're spot on about identifying and writing that down, because you're going to beat your head against the wall eventually if you're not saying, I wish I could, I want to do this, but it never happens. Well, you do need a fresh perspective, and you do need to set your priorities. And a lot of what you said takes us into number 6, which is your lack of accountability. And specifically, what it says here is the people who follow through with commitments make their commitments and plans public. And we've seen this firsthand, you and I, about how people don't want to be held accountable because they don't want to be called out. They don't want to be uncomfortable. But I think accountability is really key, and maybe one of the most important ones here.
Well, the reason accountability is so important is because we do lie to ourselves, right? And we change we change the goalposts so that we feel good about it. And if it's not until you write it, you commit to it, and you share it, right? And look, there's all different ways of sharing. So to me, I've seen kind of two different things. So I think the power of sharing can increase accountability if it's shared with people that will hold you accountable. Because I think sometimes people, you'll see it on like Facebook. Somebody will announce to the world, I'm going to do this year. And I guess that's public. But is any one of those people seeing that going to actually call you out on it?
No.
And typically no, right? I think it's maybe it's I think it's Parkinson's law or something like that. There's this psychological effect that, when you communicate something to a broader audience, right, they're less likely to call you out on it, right? They're less likely to be engaged and involved in it because they're like, well, it's groupthink, right? Someone else is going to deal with it. And so I think it's important to write it down. I think it's important to document it. I think it's important to build your own accountability systems, because what I have seen is as a person, it is really, really easy to basically cut off your accountability partners,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately your own self accountability, which I think has to be done through process. And so, we've done our hustle planner, hustle journal, right? That allows us to kind of tee that up on a consistent basis. To me, that's been so critical because it allows me to hold myself accountable, right?
Which is most important.
Because if without that process, I would say I want to hold myself accountable, but I have no way of remembering what I said I was going to do last week, the week before, right? Because our brains just naturally lie to us.
Yeah.
And so it's not until you write it down, you're like, oh, that's what I said I was going to do. And I didn't do it. And so what I've seen is then the next level, because I do think having outside accountability can still help. I think making it public by sharing it with someone that will call you out on it is fantastic. But I still go back to, I think far too often they share it thinking that, well, I shared it publicly, so that's good enough.
No.
If you have no personal accountability, you don't have a way to hold yourself accountable, and you don't share it with a small group of people or even an individual that will call you on it. I'll use the example of, your spouse, right? So anything that I share with my wife that like, this is a goal and this is what I'm going to do, guess what? She'll call me out on it. Right. And that's a good thing, right? That's why I share with her. Like, look, this needs to change. I need to do this. And I'm telling you this because I know, like, if I could have already done it, I would have already done it. For some reason, I haven't done it yet. So, I need to do this. I need to be held accountable. And again, it could be your spouse. It could be a business partner. It could be a friend. It could be, a paid coach, right? It could be all sorts of different people, but, finding that way to hold yourself accountable and then finding that outside party that'll call you out on.
Yeah, that's it's a fun topic because I've talked to a lot of people, and we've even had a client that was big on vision boards. And my first thought is a vision board isn't going to hold yourself accountable. You're just really identifying what you want, which is great because a lot of people don't know what they want to achieve. So you've identified what you wanted. You've then communicated that to your wife, and then you've then further in kind of instoned that by documenting it daily in your hustle journal, hustle planner. And so when people talk about, yeah, I'm accountable, I have a vision board, or I told my friend, or I posted this on Facebook, that's 1/10 of being accountable. And maybe all you've done is just identified what you want to achieve, which I'd argue is nice, but that's not holding yourself accountable.
Yep. It's to your point. It's a good step, and it's a step that if more people took, they're one step closer,
Yeah.
right? But you're only one step closer. There's all these other steps to take after that.
So what else is there? We've covered the 6 big ones, and just to recap, it's the weather cancels your plans. You have no plan. You don't know yourself. You have a weak choice muscle. You don't see your options, and you lack accountability. I see a lot of you
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because it's all up to you, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good rundown, a good list. I think one of the things when we think about like lying to ourselves is recognizing that there is, you can be lying to yourself. You can just be delusional about a situation. You can, lack accountability. But I think ultimately they can all get solved through process and people, right? Who you surround yourself and what's the process that you lay out to just pull that stuff out of you. I mean, certainly for some, it could be as deep as they need a therapist, right? They need a true third party that's going to uncover these things because, things have happened in their life to really pull it out. But that's great. Like that's their true you. And I think for most people, it's how are you building a process so that you can continue to hold yourself accountable, stop lying to yourself, and getting really clear and action orientated about what are you actually trying to accomplish and what's really important to you. so that you can, execute the plan. And, then it's fun, right? Like we talk about it all the time. Like the success game is an addictive, fun game, right? Because when you can set these goals, achieve things you didn't think possible, it's that adrenaline hit, right? That dopamine that comes in there. You're like, man, I want to do that again. And so how do you continue to build that in? I think so often, like when I've talked to people about this topic, people believe that like because they're lying to themselves, that like that makes them unique. When in reality, it's the true science of our brains is built to do this. So just use it, right? Like manage it, control it, because then actually it can allow you to be a fuel in many ways to move forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what's interesting though, as we wrap this episode up, is how do you prevent this? And you and I have talked a lot about daily planners, journals, journaling in general.
Mhm.
And the big takeaway for me that I keep thinking about this as we talk about it is writing things down every day. And it's not just about writing down the things you need to get done, because the to-do list is only one portion of things, as we've talked about. But is that the only thing? What else can someone do to make sure that they're not lying to themselves anymore?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things is, this is in some ways why we built what we built, right? I mean, we built the structure of the hustle planner really for ourselves, because it allows us to have a process to write these things down, right? And we've tweaked it and adjusted it to make it as impactful as possible. And I don't think you can underestimate that, because I think the writing it down it's truly the only way you can hold yourself personally accountable. And because it allows you to have a point in time of what is your brain thinking at this point in time and be able to compare it over time. And, I know a lot of people, I was this way, where I used to think I could, in the world of apps, right? Well, I can just do this in an app, and I can do this in an app. And I don't know what the science is behind it, but there's some, and I know there's technology has come a long way to try to make, these different Remarkables or iPads where you can write things down and have it feel the same. But there's truly nothing like being able to write down and really go through a process to challenge yourself. And so to me, I truly think there's no way to hold yourself accountable and stop lying to yourself without writing things down. I mean, for hundreds of years, people have kept journals, right? Writing down what they think in a specific day. And you look back at some of these most successful people, and you can see actually their progression. And so many of them is, why did they write in those things? They wrote in those things because it was them to try to capture a point in time. To me, I think the step beyond that then is many of those journals historically were just free forming, right? You write what's on your brain and what kind of happened to you that day or whatever, versus, to me, having a more systematic way of teeing yourself up of this question and this and that, and where's my focus, allows you to kind of convert that randomness of just kind of capturing what's on your mind to, really converting it to action. I think, the second piece is I truly think people should always be evaluating that 5 people rule, right? And I don't know if it's 5, I don't know if it's 7, whatever, but really looking at who are those people around you, and are they willing to hold you accountable? Are they willing to call you out? Are they challenging you in your path? But I think, to your point earlier, all that only matters if you actually want it, right? I mean, the reality is a large percentage of this world isn't looking for massive goal achievement. And if that's you, then none of this really matters, right? Because you're not, what are you aiming for? What are you shooting for? You're just going for another day. But for those that really want to take themselves and, achieve their full potential and go get something, to me, I think it's those two things. It's having that systematic way of writing things down and challenging yourself to hold yourself accountable, and finding those, 5 to 7 people that surround you, and how's that adding to what you're trying to accomplish.
Couldn't agree more. I think for me, using a daily planner is advantageous, and using it in conjunction maybe with a digital calendar like on your iOS device or Google Calendar. But the difference between the planner and the virtual calendar is that this calendar allows you to see the whole picture. And I really think of success in life and business as a recipe. If you omit any one or two ingredients, the product will not turn out properly. And so when you're looking at a daily calendar on your phone or tablet, you're only seeing one portion, maybe 1/10 of the recipe. But this daily planner allows you to see the whole picture. It allows you to maintain visibility. You've pointed this out many times. You have to see. Out of sight, out of mind comes to mind for me. And so when I see that and I'm reminded, those are the things that get me through those potential distractions. Like you get a text message, oh, I forgot to update my fantasy football, right? These are all things that happen to us. And so I don't have to but go back a couple of pages to see, oh, what were some of my big priorities this week? What are some of my goals this quarter? Because as you know, goals change month to month, quarter to quarter. And it's so resourceful. And having that visual reminder every single day is great. Having something tangible, I think for all of us, even in the wake of living in this digital world, is a wonderful reminder. And even if you have to write something down 5 consecutive weeks before you accomplish it, it's a lot more likely, as you said, than writing it down once and then never looking at it again. Because a strategy, and this is the problem I have in marketing, Dustin, is that I can get paid to create the world's most beautiful strategy for business, specifically marketing. But so often, what happens is it gets put in a file cabinet and it never gets looked at again. So it's useless, it's invaluable. But if you're using that daily planner every day, you are essentially revising, you are reading it, and it's fluid, so it's going to change. You are revising that all the time. You're writing it down, you're reminding yourself, and you're following through. And that to me is the most important part of having a strategy or a recipe. And I use those words interchangeably quite often.
Couldn't said it better.
Final thoughts on this episode, Dustin?
No, it's a great conversation. You know, this is something that I can nerd out about a lot because I think it's something that we can always improve on. But I guess I would just end with saying, you know, if you haven't thought about this for yourself, you know, just recognize that like we all are in it. This is such a common thing. And, you know, if you would have asked me about this, you know, 5-10 years ago, I certainly wouldn't have been where I am today. I have different ways that I've dealt with it. But you know, as I was sharing with you, this week I've lied to myself and next week I will too. And so it's not until you really get that into a process that you can make a difference.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot like comparing this to imposter syndrome, where it's healthy, it's natural, it's okay, but only if you allow it to be momentary. And we all get it. We're all gonna have it. We're all gonna deal with it. But that is the thing: is how do you deal with it? And I think it's definitely something you can prevent. But just know that you have control. It is a choice, and using a daily planner, which we're going to talk a lot more about, Dustin, because we are about to roll out a new product as we record this today. And we're pretty excited about this hustle planner / journal that we're working on that we hope to have out by the end of the year. And it's just a big part of what we do and what we found to be successful for ourselves. And can't wait to tell you more about it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate the downloads. Until next time, peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.